So, hello and welcome back yet again. We are back with Harrier and Tercel, who are on the road again. And don't think that I was not tempted to attempt to sing to you, but I won't torture you that way. Just everybody in your own mind, picture me singing on the road again. And just sub in your own words that make it fit Harrier and Tercel. I did think about singing it, but as willing as I am to look stupid, I'm not willing enough to do it right now. I hope everybody is doing good. As you can see, we got a taste of fall, and I am thrilled about it. Also, I did break out my bicycle and I pumped up the tires because they were very, very flat. And oh my gosh. Let me just say, I forgot that riding a bike takes very different muscles from walking. It's a very humbling experience to walk 8 miles, which I've been doing a couple times a week. I will go out and walk for 3 or 4 hours straight, barely stop at all, trucking right along, having a grand old time, a little sore in the feet, but other than that, just sleeping good. I rode on my bike just to the mailboxes and back, and that's less than a quarter of a mile. It's probably not even an eighth of a mile. It's just a little, I can see it. Well, okay, I can't actually see it from my house, but it's really close. I I got off the bike and was like, all of my leg muscles are yelling very loudly. Very different muscles being used. And I plan on doing that a lot more because obviously there are muscles in my legs that just are not getting any exercise from walking. So that was what I did today. And we'll just ride carefully. I'm still a little bit leery. I'm like, if I fall off and bust my head wide open, I'm going to feel very dumb. But then I remember that as a teenager, a bike was my primary source of transportation. And they do say, whenever you're learning something or trying to relearn it, everybody's always like, it's just like riding a bike, you never forget. Which is true. It was very easy to hop onto the bike and just go. So, wish me luck. Anyway, we are going to do my unhinged recaps yet again with chapter 6 of the Phoenix Endangered. I was like, the Phoenix in something, the Phoenix Endangered, by Mercedes Lackey and James Mallory. And this one, chapter 6, if you've never read it before and you were kind of wondering why Georgia was asking what I thought of Kerta the unicorn, this chapter kind of lets you know why I have formed the opinions that I have of her. And chapter 6 is titled The Unicorn's Feast. So, like I said, just imagine me singing on the road again, because in the last chapter, Harrier and Tercel stopped at Black Rowan Farm and got resupplied. They found out that this is the last probably major place with people / elves until they reach at least the Mandarian Desert, where Harrier knows that there are trading outposts there. There are cities there. It's just none that he's ever been to. So Harrier made sure to give a very thorough list of everything that they were going to need, and then he and the elf who was helping him packed their wagon completely full. That comes up later. Put a pin in that one, that the wagon is stuffed full. And they had their last evening at Black Rowan Farm, and now they're moving back out. It starts, chapter 6 does, with the horses Nethiel and Dulian, who are the two elven bred draft horses, which I would love to see an elven bred draft horse. I bet they're gorgeous. In my head, at least, and they probably looked nothing like it, but in my head, they look like a Percheron, which is a absolutely like the prettiest draft horse, in my opinion, ever. Mostly because the Percherons are somewhere back in their ancestry, they were crossed with Arabians. So imagine this massive, huge horse. They're almost always gray, but imagine that, but give them a slightly Arabian head. So they've got that slightly dished profile, wide set eyes. That's what I'm imagining as Nethiel and Dulian. That's what I imagine they look like. Because it's my imagination and I can do whatever I want with it. Anyway, the two elven bred draft horses are a little bit frisky. So Harrier's got his hands full and he's getting them all hitched to the wagon. And one of the elven ladies comes out and is like, you know what? I wish you a safe journey, and I have this hamper for you. This is all pretty perishable stuff. You're going to want to eat it in the next couple days. There might be a pie in there, but I don't think you'll find it a hardship to eat. Harrier agrees that he loves food and manages to open up the door to the wagon and wedge it in there. And he really has to wedge it in there because this wagon is packed to the gills with as many things as he could think of to ask. So they leave the farm and they're moving on down the road. The horses eventually settle a little bit. They were feeling very frisky after their rest. And Harrier's just kind of driving along, looking up. Every now and then he'll see Ankildar and Tercel, and he wonders idly what it would be like to ride up there. And as he's distracted, he hears, quoting, "There you are. I thought you were supposed to be in a hurry to get wherever it is that you're going. I almost got tired of waiting. At least you took time to read your books." Harrier's automatic startled tug on the reins brought the wagon to a halt. He took a deep breath, grateful that he hadn't yelped in shock, and he glanced down at the side of the wagon. Kerta was standing there looking at him. He's like, oh, she's back. And he asks why she didn't come to the farm, and she points out that he obviously doesn't know very much about unicorns, does he? He asks if all unicorns are as annoying as she is, and she puts on a very hurt tone of voice, and she's like, I'm not annoying. And Harrier stops, and he's like, you're pretty, but no, you're very annoying. He gets moving on down the road. He gets the horses going again. She's trotting along next to him. And she's like, did you get all the things that I told you that you should get? Did you get oat cakes and apples and chestnuts? And he's like, why would I have gotten all of these things that you want when you took off without even a word and I had no idea if you were even going to be around? Kerta, of course, thinks that this means that he missed her. Harrier tells her that he hoped that she was gone for good. And why would he have gotten her anything when she would just stuff herself with it? And so they go on, quoting, "You won't be doing any stuffing of yourself now because I didn't take your provision list to the farm," said Harrier. "Well, I'm sure you got some good things to eat at least," said Kirta. "And how in the name of the eternal light would I know what unicorns like to eat?" Harrier demanded. Then he sighed. "Yes, probably, maybe. We'll see." "Oh, good!" Kirta galloped up the road for a short distance, stopped in the middle, and, well, capered was the best way that Harrier could describe it. The early morning sun gleamed off her golden coat, and her spiral horns sparkled like the inside of a seashell. And even while Harrier was attempting to be cross, he had to admit she was beautiful. The legends and wonder tales all said that Kellen had ridden the magic unicorn Shulkin into battle. Looking at Kerta, Harrier just couldn't imagine it. Until he had seen the Light Temple at Imethalion, he had always assumed that unicorns were the size of horses, but Kerta was about the same size as the ones depicted on the carved wall panels back in the temple, the size of a small deer. And those dated back to the time of mages, so Harrier had to imagine that they were accurate, and that unicorns hadn't changed that much in the last 1,000 years. He still couldn't see how you would ride something that size, though. Fortunately, he thought it was going to be one of the few problems he wasn't going to have. I do love that description of unicorns. And, it is funny how many descriptions of unicorns don't match up with how we depict them, because if you look at most of the oldest descriptions of them, they are described as being far more deer-like than horse-like. So I do think that Mercedes Lackey and James Mallory did a very good job with their unicorns. After Kerta is done capering, she comes trotting back and tries to make small talk. Harrier is being typically Harrier, and he is arguing with her. She's being annoying, as only a unicorn can be. And she asks him how he likes being a night mage, and he's like, "I'm not a night mage." And she's like, "But you read your books, didn't you?" And Harrier tells her that he only read a part of one of them. And that doesn't mean anything, because he's read lots of books, and that doesn't mean that that makes him into anything. Kerta asks why he's arguing, and Harrier stops to think that arguing with Kerta is like juggling balls of tar. You end up with it all over, and no idea of how it happened, and no way to get unstuck. He tries to ignore her and discovers that that's not going to work either. She peppers him with what he considers are idiotic questions, but she also is pointing out all sorts of useful things that he's actually interested in. She points out, the different types of trees, the different wildlife that they see, and she drops the little gems like in another day or two they're going to be out in truly wild, uncultivated country. At least as wild and uncultivated as anything in the Elven lands ever gets. Harrier thinks again, that is true. The Elven lands kind of always look like they're being tended by invisible gardeners, and for all he knows, they could be. It's just about lunchtime when Tercel and Ankeldar should be landing, so Harrier pulls the wagon off to one side near a nice convenient stream to get things set up. Tercel and Ankeldar land, And Trussell's like, all right, I need to get some of the stuff out of the wagon. He opens up the door and he's like, how am I supposed to find anything in here? Why is it this full? Harrier tells him that he's probably going to be wishing that it was at least that full in about a week or two when they start eating their way through the supplies. There will be plenty of room. And Harrier's like, look, all you got to do to find your mage junk is move stuff around. Just be sure and put it back where you found it. Harrier takes a couple of barrels because even though he isn't going to be unhitching the horses, they do deserve a drink and a little bit of grain while Harrier and Tercel have lunch. He hands Tercel the big hamper full of yummy things from Black Rowan Farm and heads off to get water. And, as he's going along, he thinks about Samara, which makes him very sad. He thinks how much she would have loved to have seen Elven lands, and she probably would have laughed very hard at the fact that he is now a mage. Even if he doesn't feel like he's a mage. He gets back to the wagon and, quoting again, when he walked back to the wagon with the bucket of water, Tercel looked up at him with helpless exasperation. I just set it down for a minute, he said. Kerta had her face in a pie dish, gobbling up its contents enthusiastically. Harrier sighed. There wasn't even any point in being angry. You probably couldn't have stopped her, he said. Unless, you hit her with a bolt of lightning or something. You couldn't do that, I suppose? It's good, said Kerta, raising her head. Her muzzle was covered with what looked like blackberries. She was purple halfway to her eyes. You look ridiculous, Harrier said flatly. And you're a thief. He walked over, picked up the pie dish, and skimmed it a few feet away. It hit the grass and slid. Hey, I wasn't done with that. Then go finish it, Harrier said unfeelingly. He sat down on the blanket and filled the kettle. Tercel had already lit the fire in the brazier, and the water would boil soon. You didn't let her get into anything else, did you? No, said Tercel. She... And you with 4 sisters. Harrier scoffed. He would have thought that Tercel could manage one pesky unicorn after riding her herd on a house full of younger sisters. But she's a unicorn. Fine, said Harrier. So none of your sisters has hooves and a tail, as far as I can see. That's about the only difference. Leaving it at that, they start to spread out everything and see what else was in the picnic hamper other than a pie that they won't be eating. There's fresh bread, there's some cold chickens, there's apples, there's fruit bread. I mean, they're going to have a large set of meals. The elf Clear had been right. The contents in the hamper would probably do for a few meals, so they start to eat when, quoting, I'm still hungry, said Kerta a few minutes later. Go eat grass, Harrier said heartlessly. You're mean. Tercel laughed, nearly spilling hot water on himself since he was filling the teapot. I suppose there's all kinds of unicorns, he said, a few moments later. Harrier could recognize the sound of Tercel hastily backpedaling when he recognized that he had said something that might hurt someone's feelings. What do you mean by that? Said Kerta. Well, I mean, there's all kinds of people, some that are... Yes, said Kerta dangerously. She was swishing her tail back and forth, and Harrier could tell she had no intention of letting Tercel get out of the conversation gracefully. So be it. Tercel might worry about hurting her feelings, but he didn't. He means that some are mature and reasonable, like him, and there are others who steal people's lunches when their backs are turned. Kerta rounded on him, blue eyes wide. The effect would have been a lot more dramatic if her nose hadn't been purple. Harrier snickered. "You're mean," she said. "You're mean and hateful, and I don't like you anymore. All I've ever done is help you. I brought you your books and everything." "And you stole our pie," said Harrier. He had grown up on the docks and spent a good portion of that time with people trying to wheedle him into one thing or another. It would be different if he thought that her feelings had actually been hurt, but he didn't think so. "It's not like you asked, or waited to be asked." "That's not fair." "Actually, it probably is," said Tercel, as though the idea had just occurred to him. "I know you and Harrier argue all the time, but he's always shared his food with you, and so would I." "All right," said Kerta. "I said that I was hungry. Give me some of the bread. You have a lot." "No," said Harrier. "And that's fair, too," said Tercel. There was probably a long explanation that would have followed that fact, but Kerta didn't stick around to hear it. Tercel had barely gotten half of his next sentence out before she wheeled away and galloped off. And in only a few moments, she was just a bright speck in the distance. "She is fast," said Harrier, as he reached for the teapot. And that is the last that they see of Kerta, at least for a little bit. Not forever, because a few hours later they're packing away their food, and Tercel is getting everything cleaned up, getting the horses back ready to start moving out. He's going to wash the dishes. Tercel and Ankeldar have already taken off into the sky, and, Harrier's like, "All right, I'll get these dishes done." And, quoting, "He was kneeling on the stream bank, setting the last clean dish on the grass, when he felt a sudden sharp blow between his shoulder blades and went sprawling into the water. Fortunately, the stream wasn't that deep, but he inhaled enough water that he came up coughing and choking, blinded by mud. He scrubbed it hastily out of his eyes, smearing it everywhere, and spun. He didn't know what had hit him, and he had never forgotten that Tercel had enemies." Kerta was standing on the bank, laughing her fool head off. Now, Harrier almost loses his temper then. He does remember that his father always told him to pick your fights. That you don't pick fights with people who are smaller than you, and you don't pick fights with girls, at least not in Harrier's ethos. And he doesn't really think that Kerta's probably weaker than he is. She is definitely a girl. He also has time to think that if he chases her, he probably wouldn't catch her anyway, since she was right. She's at least as fast as Ankeldar. He was standing there thinking all of these thoughts because he knows if he doesn't cool off and gets within reach of her, he might not remember that she is a girl. And finally, after a few deep, calming breaths, he turns and faces Kerta, and he says, "You're a bully. That's all you are." Whatever reaction she had been expecting from him, it wasn't that. "You look funny," she said. "Yeah, right." He then turns his back on her and picks up the dishes. He's very glad that the horses are very placid and well trained, that they hadn't bolted when she kicked him into the river. He puts everything away, and Kerta comes up behind him. She says, "You aren't mad, are you?" Harrier stopped. "You know what?" he said. "I was wondering why you were here. Well, mostly why you kept hanging around. And I think it's because you really don't have any place else to go. Because if you act this way with everybody, it's hard to imagine that you have any friends." By the time he had led the team back up to the side of the road, Kerta had vanished yet again. Harrier shrugs, unpacks the wagon enough to find himself some clothes that aren't wet and muddy, and climbs back up to drive along. They didn't see Kerta for all the rest of that day, and Harrier's starting to think that maybe she's gone for good. When he gets the camp set up for the night, Tercel comes spiraling down, and he's like, Harrier, you've got mud in your hair and you've changed clothes?" He looks around to see if Kerta's around, and Harrier's like, she's not around. She kicked me, laughed at me, and yeah, she kicked me right into the river, so I kind of had to change clothes. Tercel is absolutely aghast. He's like, "She could have hurt you." And Harrier's like, "I don't think that was anything that occurred to her. She wanted to get me back because I told her that she's a thief and a bully, and that was as far as it went with her." Tercel, being typically Tercel, is like, "She kicked you and she ran away." Harrier's like, "If she's going to be like that, she's not good company. It's not that big of a deal, and we need to eat." They get everything ready, and they're settling in. Harrier has got the horses down to the stream for a drink, and he's getting everything completely ready because Tercel has gone off with Ankeldar to practice magic. When Tercel gets back, or before Tercel gets back, Harrier stops to wonder, when is he actually supposed to do any of his mage stuff? Not that he really wants to be a mage, but if he did, he takes care of camp, and he's taking care of the horses, and he's basically taking care of Tercel. He doesn't have time to be a mage. He thinks that this is actually a pretty good situation because he doesn't want to be a mage anyway. But, he thinks a little bit more, and he's like, every wonder tale that he's ever read say that wild magic mages get their 3 books and they just have magic. And he kind of assumed it would be really easy, but it seems like there's probably more to it, and he yet again wishes that there was someone he could ask. He does think about Kerta, who did seem to at least know something about the wild magic, but that just makes him very angry. He thinks again about the fact that she's absolutely beautiful, and then he remembers that Tercel told him that the fire woman who's been in his dreams and visions is also beautiful. And maybe the wild magic sent Kerta to remind him that just because something is beautiful does not mean that it's completely trustworthy. Obviously, he doesn't think that Kerta is evil or tainted by darkness, but she is a bully and a brat. With all of these thoughts, he gathers up wood as he's doing his evening chores. He briefly thinks that since he's supposed to be a mage, maybe he could just try lighting the fire, with his mind, since that's one without a mage price. But he's been using flint and steel since he was old enough to strike flint and steel together, and he doesn't intend on trying to light things on fire with his head anytime soon. Tercel lands or hasn't landed yet. He sees the lights as Tercel is off practicing the magics off in the distance. And Harrier pulls out the hamper, eats a couple of apples, and it's just about dark when Tercel and Ankildar come back. We do get a little bit of a description again about how it's hard to imagine something the size of a sailing ship moving gracefully, but Ankildar actually does. Tercel comes in, flops down on the blanket, and he's like, this is not getting any easier. They banter back and forth because Harrier's like, you haven't even been doing this magic stuff for a fortnight. You can complain that it's still hard after at least a moon turn. And Kildar raises his head and is like, huh, well, the boys are eating. And that is where, and I'm going to read the entire end of the chapter because it's just too good. It shows Harrier's level-headedness. You know, he's very practical. He might lose his temper, but he is also very practical. And a little bit more about Kerta. About the time the tea was ready, Ankildar raised his head. He said in a thoughtful tone. Kerta was walking slowly toward them. Her head was down, and her tail practically dragged on the grass. Even her ears drooped. She stopped a few feet away. I know you won't believe me, she said in a low voice, but I'm sorry. For what? Harrier asked. He was surprised at how calm he felt, not the least bit angry. For kicking you into the water, that was wrong. Yes, it was, said Harrier. His back still hurt. Is there anything else that you're sorry for? He had the bizarre sensation that he had suddenly become his father because he had been on the receiving end of just such a series of questions so many times when he had done something he shouldn't have. Both of his parents thought that punishing their children did not do any good if they didn't know exactly what they were being punished for. And Antares Gillian was a fair man if any of his children could prove that they had not known what they were doing was wrong, or that what they were doing wasn't actually wrong, well, then they wouldn't be punished for their actions. And because he had always listened first, no matter how angry he was, his children had repaid that faith with honesty. Kerta's head drooped even lower. I'm sorry I took your food without asking. I'm sorry I took it because that wasn't right. Okay, Harrier said. Tercel opened his mouth to speak, but Harrier held up a hand. I'm glad you apologized for both of those things. And he really did sound like his father right now. And I'm glad that you're sorry, but what we all need to know is that you're not going to do it again. I won't, said Kerta. I promise. Okay, said Harrier, trying not to sigh with relief. We'll say no more about it then. He really didn't like laying down the law to a unicorn, even an incredibly annoying one, and he couldn't imagine what he would have said if she had told him she was just going to do the same things again. Kerta seemed to be as relieved as he was. What are you eating? She said hopefully. Bread, chicken, and cheese, said Tercel. They're apples. May I have an apple? Said Kerta politely. Tercel scrambled to dig in the hamper and find one for her, and Harrier grinned to himself. He didn't think that Kerta's extravagant politeness was going to last, but he didn't think that she would just go back to snatching food out from under their noses either. And as you can see, that is where the chapter ends. And I really did feel that that was one of those that I was going to have to read because I love the interaction between Kerta and Harrier. They really do. I mean, you can tell that Harrier and Tercel both had really, really good parents, like the kind of parents that are aspirational, because, I mean, not everybody is lucky enough to have parents like that. And even though I don't think my parents were necessarily bad parents, I still kind of envy both Tercel and Harrier for theirs. It sounds like they were really good parents. And now you see why I think that Kerta is just a bully. And also why I feel like she's young. Like, and I don't know, and I don't think it's ever stated in this book or in any of the others in the either Obsidian trilogy or the Enduring Flame trilogy. So I don't think that there's anything that says what the lifespan of a unicorn is, or how old an old unicorn is versus how old a young unicorn is, or if maybe they are just immortal. I don't think they are. I think they're just probably like elves and really, really, really long lived. But just the way she's written, Kerta feels young. She feels very young, and she just reminds me, not as bad as, I was going to say she reminds me of the girls from Judy Blume's Blubber. And I don't think she's that bad. I don't think she's that cliquey, but she reminds me of, if if she had been written about as a human girl, she probably would have been somewhere between like 9 and 12. She just is written like a preteen girl who is not very sure of her place and thinks that being loud and a little bit of a bully is the way to win friends and influence people. So that's my opinion. After that chapter, let me know what you think of Kerta. I mean, I don't think she's irredeemable. I just think she needs to grow up. Also, I do love Harrier taking on the lecturing dad mode, because in the entire first book, even though he's been taking care of Tercel and being very responsible, I just didn't quite picture him, at least not the first time I read this series, as being patient ever. And him not exploding at Kerta definitely shows hints of character to come. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments down below. Thank you for listening. Please do hit the thumbs up if you don't mind. It does always make me smile, and I will see you next time.